I don't know if it is regarded as a thoroughly respectable career, but
to all intents and purposes.
I don't think that's necessarily the point. If the ground rules have been set out that you hire somebody and they're there to do a particular role within the function you're at, whether it's well advised that you even thought about going down that track, if you deviate from those rules, I don't know what you do. Do you just, you should crash tackle them to the ground if they're really, really seriously out of order, or just terminate the whole thing. The whole thing has been an ill-advised adventure, and it's ended up so far with allegations. And as I said earlier, I don't know the full story, so I wouldn't want to go too much further than that. But I just think it's not going to end well, and I think blaming her is not a good idea. She did not force her way into the room. She was hired to do a particular job.
Something else that hasn't ended well, Kevin Roberts has gone as executive chairman now from Saatchi & Saatchi. He had already been stood down and now he's said goodbye in the wake of his remarks about gender diversity in advertising agencies. Linda, do you suspect the time might have been coming for him to go anyway, or was what he said about gender equality not being an issue in advertising sufficiently serious in itself?
Oh, no, I think it was what he said. If you take the personalities out of it, this whole episode could be the sort of perfect end to the Mad Men. You know, you can see sort of Don Draper going out in this sort of fashion. That's what I thought this morning when I saw the apology. I mean, it was a fulsome apology, and for that he deserves some credit. Whether or not they had to strong-arm him to do it, we'll never know. But what he said was just not in keeping with modern business. I mean, the women from the advertising industry have had their say in the last couple of days, and we should believe them. The industry, as a whole, is still dominated very much by white men who earn a great deal of money and, talk over everybody else. So his comments in general about women's ambition, being circular and not being the same as men's ambition, I mean, he describes it as a miscommunication. That's the least of it, really. I mean, but I don't believe that Kevin Roberts would have actually thought he was denigrating women. I mean, I think this is a case of that unconscious bias, and we all suffer from it, and we see it in all industries. I mean, the law, the legal profession is no different in this regard, where you do have men and very highly placed in the legal profession who, genuinely believe that the reason that there are only 17 or 16% of women partners in law firms across the board is because, women don't have that ambition. I mean, that's not the case. So he is a generation and a time that needs to move with the times, but he's not alone, and I don't think that it was malicious or vindictive.
A female columnist in the UK today says, given the current, because you've mentioned the issue of middle-aged white men, given the current appetite for shaming old white men, it is highly unlikely that women are being stopped from achieving by sexist bosses. Roberts doesn't want a debate about gender equality, but neither do his critics. Let's stop this pretense of a debate about gender and get serious about defending women's agency and capability. And that means allowing men like Roberts to have an opinion and to voice it freely without being silenced or sagged. Is there that aspect to it too, that however wrong you think he is, if you think he was, motivated benignly to an extent, as you're suggesting, Linda, that he's allowed to say what he wants?
He can say what he wants. That's absolutely fine. But, the board of the company for which he, with which he's been so closely associated, have decided that that's embarrassing for their brand. And he works in a brand business, so there are going to be consequences.
But what I would ask Linda, though, is the board must have been aware over 20 years of his views, and at least we know what they are. And surely it cannot have come as a surprise to them that he held these views. Now we know what they are. I'm pleased he was able to say them, and he must take the consequences, whether it's considered fair or not by him or other people. But it's good to know. Thank God he wasn't media trained into sort of saying one thing and thinking completely the opposite.
Yeah, indeed.
There must have been some enlightened views in there, because I think women employees outnumber male employees at Saatchi & Saatchi.
Yeah, because why? Like every other of these professions, because mainly they're a lot cheaper and they work blimmin' hard. Let's not give credit, where it's not due, James.
Linda Clark, Claire Delore, thank you so much. Checkpoint with John Campbell now.
Kia Kia ora everyone, haere mai. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of our excellent team, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tau te maira I hoa mā he kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight, the Chiefs, their sponsor, Scarlet, and what they're all saying about what happened on Mad Monday and what's happened since. A man with a knife starts stabbing people in central London. In Katikati, locals prepare to confront the Transport Minister about a stretch of State Highway 2 where 5 Tongan workers were killed in a crash and about which warnings have been sounded before. A cancer diagnosis, chemotherapy and a bone marrow transplant to retain a WINS benefit should he be looking for work. And we cross to our Olympics team who seem to have based themselves on Copacabana Beach. But first, here's Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. A major sponsor of the Chiefs says a stripper who claimed she was molested by players opened herself up to bad behaviour when she took off her clothes in a room of young men at a club party. The woman, known only as Scarlet, was hired to perform, but says she was repeatedly touched despite her protests, sworn at and had gravel thrown at her. The Waikato company Gallagher has its name across the Chiefs jersey. Its corporate services executive Margaret Comer says the allegations are not in keeping with the company's ethics and values, but she says the stripper also needs to take responsibility for her actions. Ms Comer says she's trying to find out exactly what happened, and you can hear more from Margaret Comer shortly on Checkpoint. The bodies of 5 Tongan men killed in Bay of Plenty earlier this week have been released back to their families. The men, 4 of which were in New Zealand on seasonal work visas, were leaving a kiwifruit cool store near Katikati on Tuesday night when their car was hit by a truck on State Highway 2. Katikati Seasonal Employer Liaison Officer Sefete Hauli has been working with their families in New Zealand and in Tonga about what happens next. He says the families of the 4 seasonal workers want them brought home.
Now the funeral directors are preparing the deceased to be repatriated back to Tonga as soon as possible. Now those details as to when is still unknown because we have never had to put 4 Tongan caskets on an aircraft to Tonga.
Sefita Hauli says the 5th man, who is based in Auckland, will be buried there. Meanwhile, a local community leader says he's disappointed Tonga's Prime Minister cancelled his trip to Katikati. Akalisi Pohiva, who's visiting New Zealand, was expected to meet with relatives of the men who died and attend a community service. His office says they were advised not to fly due to bad weather. But the chair of the Tongan Advisory Council Board, Malino Maka, says in a tragic event like this, the Prime Minister should drop everything. A spokesperson says Mr Pohiva will meet with families back in Tonga. The lawyer for a man accused of failing to get an elderly woman help before she was starved to death in his home says he only found out how bad she was on the day she died. Brian and Luana Taylor are on trial accused of failing to get Ina Dung help despite knowing she was in danger. In her closing address today, Brian Taylor's lawyer, Louise Fryer, says Ms Dung's daughter was responsible for caring for her mother. She said it was clear Cindy Taylor wasn't coping in the last few days of Mrs Dung's life, but Brian Taylor didn't know that.
There's been no evidence that suddenly Cindy Taylor starts crying hysterically and says, I can't do this anymore, I can't do this anymore, my mother is wasting away there, she got sores all over her body, I can't cope. Nothing like that.
Louise Fryer says Brian Taylor was asked to check on Mrs Dung and it was only at that point he saw her state, and by then it was too late. The police in London say mental health problems could be behind a knife attack in the central city that's left a woman in her 60s dead and 5 other people injured. But they're refusing to rule out terrorism as a motive. Armed police tasered a 19-year-old man before arresting him. The police commissioner, Mark Rowley, says they're keeping an open mind.
A 19-year-old man was arrested shortly after 10:39 p.m. and is currently in police custody at hospital. Early indications suggest that mental health is a significant factor in this case.
Police Commissioner Mark Rowley. The threat of legal action has failed to stop Wellington City councillors from backing compulsory microchipping of all cats over 3 months old. The measure passed by 10 votes to 3 at a turbulent meeting of the council's Environmental Committee today. Proponents of the idea say it's good for the environment and a foolproof way of distinguishing between domestic cats and ferals and strays. But those opposed say it stretches the council's legal powers and are warning they would test it in court. The amendment still has to be approved by the full Wellington City Council at a meeting in 2 weeks. A man has died after being hit by a train at a level crossing on Budge Street in Blenheim just after 3 o'clock this afternoon. The police do not believe there are any suspicious circumstances and the death has been referred to the coroner. In sport, the Hurricanes captain Dane Coles rates himself an 80% chance to play Saturday night's Super Rugby final against the Lions in Wellington. The All Blacks hooker missed last weekend's semi-final win over the Chiefs with a rib cartilage injury and has been bracketed alongside Ricky Ratelli to start. Coles says he's been able to participate in full scrum and contact training and has a good chance of leading his side in pursuit of their maiden Super Rugby title.
I'm pretty confident. I got through a lot today than I did last week, and give myself a bit of a big session tomorrow at Captain's Run, just do a few things, and get me right up to kick-off. But yeah, I'm pretty confident, mate. Like I feel in a pretty good space at the moment, and the ribs did some scrums this morning, so yeah, things are looking pretty promising at this time.
The Lions are also chasing their maiden Super Rugby title. Meanwhile, the All Blacks flanker Sam Cane has been told to stay at home as he recovers from a head knock suffered in the Chiefs' loss to the Hurricanes last weekend. Cane was meant to join the All Blacks camp for the Rugby Championship this week, but he, Crusaders prop Joe Moody and the Highlanders All Blacks have been given extra time to recover from the Super Rugby season. Teddy Stanaway's Olympic dream has been dashed as injury has ruled him out of the New Zealand men's sevens team. He's been replaced by Lewis Ormond, while former All Black Liam Measam has been put on standby and is on his way to Rio. That's the news.
Gender bias.
This is absolutely not about one bad apple. This is about stopping the rot that is endemic through the top of our industry.
Political turmoil.
I really only have 3 words for that. I think that's pot kettle black, just quietly.
Role models in hot water.
After I'd finished the strip, they wanted me to be a whore, which I wasn't there to be.
Covering the controversial. Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the head of the National Pathology Service says it's being pushed to the brink by a lack of staff. And after 10, Kiwi sailor Graham Kendall on his record-breaking voyage through the icy Northwest Passage, solo, non-stop. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island except for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Rain or showers with isolated heavy falls, snow lowering to 600 metres about the central high country overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers turning to rain this evening with some heavy falls tomorrow. The snow level is lowering to 600 metres tomorrow, affecting the Napier-Taupo Road. Nelson to and Buller through to Fiordland, fine apart from scattered rain with snow above 800 metres in Nelson and Buller clearing this evening. For the remainder of the South Island, occasional rain or showers with snow above 300 metres in Marlborough and to lower levels elsewhere. The Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's 5:08.
Thanks, Katrina. We begin tonight with the Chiefs rugby team and what happened at the team's Mad Monday end-of-season celebration at Hot Springs, about 45 minutes drive from Hamilton. The CEO of the Super Rugby franchise held a media conference early this afternoon to say an investigation is being launched into allegations about the treatment of a stripper, and if they're substantiated, appropriate action will be taken. This is what Andrew Flexman said.
It would be fair to say that we're really disappointed in the actions of our players in engaging the services of a performer to attend an after or a post-season celebration that took place on Monday. I can assure you all that we're extremely disappointed, as I said, with the action in engaging that particular performer. And these alleged allegations we will be taking extremely seriously indeed. And in no way does the Chiefs as an organisation condone the actions of the players in engaging the stripper, and indeed if any of these allegations are substantiated, we will be taking the appropriate action. So the process from here is that an investigation will be launched as soon as this media conference is concluded. We will run that alongside New Zealand Rugby, who are the employers of our professional players in New Zealand. As a result of that investigation, if it is concluded that any of the allegations are substantiated, we give everybody an assurance that we will be taking the action that is deemed appropriate to be taken, given the seriousness of the allegations that are substantiated. Thank you.
Andrew, can I just get this one out of the way first? I think you know it's coming. You said her standing in the community and culpability is not beyond reproach. Was that appropriate?
Look, in retrospect, and I've made a comment on this morning, I probably regret the way that was expressed. In no way do I take, or as a person and the values that I have, given the vocation that this particular woman is involved in, do I cast aspersions on her as a person as a result of that vocation? That's just simply not what I believe in. So I've reflected on those comments, and whilst to a degree there was some context, I believe, around those, I have to be honest and say that I was disappointed with the way they were expressed.
Also, you said, this is just one person's allegations. That seems to imply that you're denying it straight off the bat before knowing the story. Was that appropriate?
Oh, look, as I've said, I don't think the way it was expressed was appropriate, and the reality is we've made no assumptions about anything because we haven't yet conducted an investigation. As I've alluded to, we'll be doing that this afternoon. We are going to get a sense through that investigation of the facts. We've got varying versions of events, and once we've got to the bottom of things, we will make some decisions accordingly.
Do you know who was involved?
Can you confirm that the Chiefs senior players, All Blacks among them, are part of this investigation as well?
Look, we don't know yet. We haven't, as I say, there's still plenty of, there's varying versions of events. We have not yet conducted the investigation. So the answer to that question, I do not know yet who's involved, and I should say allegedly involved. So the answer to that question is I'm just not in a position to comment.
Is it normal for Chiefs to have strippers at their functions, at their wind-down functions?
To the best of my knowledge, no. That's as best as I can answer that question.
The stripper also says that she was scared. These are in her words. Your players wanted her to behave like a whore, and they also shortchanged her. What do you say to that?
Okay, guys, we're going to wrap it up there. As you said, there's an investigation. You can't comment on anything until the investigation.
And do you understand that?
Thanks, guys. It's over now.
Thank you. Make comment on that.
Thank you, guys.
Andrew Flexman, the Chiefs CEO, speaking at a media stand-up in Hamilton this afternoon. The Chiefs' naming rights sponsor is Waikato company Gallagher. I asked their spokesperson, Corporate Services Executive Manager Margaret Comer, what the company thinks of all of this.
I'm torn. As a woman, I believe that, you should be able to do things that, like take your clothes off. But on the other hand, I'm also torn between if you choose to take your clothes off in a room of young men, you really are opening yourself up for behaviour that is not nice. I'm not quite sure what happened. I wasn't there. It's not good. But in terms of our sponsorship, we are involved because they play superb rugby. And in any interaction I have had with these young men, they are respectful, they are professional, and I've never, ever seen anything that would, cause me to think, oh, God, there goes that 1950s rugby behaviour. I just have not seen it.
If this stuff is true,
yeah,
given that these are professional players who represent their community,
yes,
who play near the very top level of our national sport.
What do you mean near the top level?
Well, I
Excuse me.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say at the top level of our national sport.
Yeah.
Is that kind of conduct in any way acceptable?
And the short answer is no. But I would also like to see responsibility in this last example of both parties. Don't take your clothes off. Stand in a room of young 20 to 25-year men, and don't and not expect something to be annoying or because you've said no.
But once you say no, Margaret, it's no, isn't it? I mean,
Yes, it is.
That's what the word no means, isn't it? No is
That's
no.
correct. No is no.
So the moment she said no to those professional rugby players,
Yep.
they needed to stop, didn't they?
Yep, absolutely. But unfortunately, John, we weren't there. We don't know whether no was said, but I'll take her word for it on this occasion. But I'm a bit annoyed that we are in this sort of debate. It shouldn't be happening.
And it wouldn't happen, surely, if they hadn't hired a stripper.
That's right, absolutely.
If they can't look at a stripper without humiliating her, prima facie, reportedly yelling out misogynistic remarks, and prima facie reportedly touching her, then they need not to do it, don't they?
That is quite correct, John, but did that happen?
Margaret Comer from Gallagher, I spoke with her earlier today. So what does the woman at the centre of all of this say? Her professional name is Scarlett, and I began by asking her via Skype video, although she has chosen to withhold her actual identity, how she got the Mad Monday booking in the first place.
I was booked on the Sunday through an agent, so I didn't deal with the people directly. It was all confirmed and it was all to go ahead at 5 o'clock as planned the next day.
So this is pretty routine stuff. This is what happens. If someone wants you to come to something, they go through an agent, you are given the job and you turn up at it.
Yeah, the agent's job is to get their details, take the deposit, and organise it all for the girl so it's less stress and hopefully runs smoothly.
And so in terms of running smoothly, what was it like when you were there?
So when I turned up, they're all in fancy dress, which indicates that it's going to be a rowdy party to start with, which is fine, I'm used to that. I walked into quite a lot of drunk men, like probably about 40 of them were there. I was immediately heckled straight away, so I just went straight into doing the performance, didn't worry about making any small talk.
And when you were doing the performance, what was happening?
So they closed in really quick all around me and just made it quite intimidating. There was gravel being thrown at me. They were encouraging the players to do horrible things to me as I'd go towards each one. There was one guy that I repeatedly told to stop touching me. I hit him in the genitals, in the face, and proceeded to slam his head into the ground to enforce that I meant no. They kind of got the message then, but then just continued a couple of minutes later and progressively got worse.
So you asked them not to touch you, and you repeated that, and you were explicit about it?
Very. I would normally have stopped the show immediately that they first poured the alcohol on me, but I felt that would have resulted in a worse outcome for me.
So you were, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, how were you feeling? Were you afraid? Were you alarmed? Were you what?
I was intimidated and scared.
And people are saying, you're a stripper, this sort of thing must happen all the time. Does it?
It does happen more often than people care to admit. It's not acceptable. It's sexual abuse, basically. If someone is saying no to you, it means no. It's regardless whether you're a sex worker or not.
Scarlett, people keep coming back to your job. I guess that you're a stripper. The chief CEO said, and I quote, "You've got to remember, this is one person's accusation and his standing in the community and culpability is not beyond reproach." Now, he's since apologised for that and said he regrets saying it. What would you say back to him?
The plate's still broken. You know, an apology doesn't fix things. I mean, that's lovely, that's accepted, but I mean, there needs to be some repercussions for this. It's not acceptable, and we're all professionals here, I thought.
What would you like to see happen now, Scarlett? There's an investigation. What would you think was fair and appropriate in response to the treatment you received?
Well, apologies to me would be nice. Getting paid the money that they owe me would be nice. Just the little things, and just realising that it's not acceptable behaviour, because it's not.
The time on Checkpoint is 5:20. Now, listening to all of this as it goes to air is Dr. Ange Jury, Chief Executive of the National Women's Refuge Collective. Margaret Comer, who spoke to us on behalf of Galahad, the chief sponsor, is also trustee of Waikato's Women's Refuge, Te Whakaruruhau, and Ange Jury is going to talk to us about all of this and her take on it after the news at 6. Coming up in the nearer future on Checkpoint, an Auckland man diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma calls for a change to the law after work and income put him on a job seeker's benefit while undergoing chemotherapy. He also has a bone marrow transplant coming up. And emotions run high in the Bay of Plenty as locals prepare to confront the Transport Minister about a stretch of highway where 5 Tongan workers were killed in a crash on Tuesday night. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101. You can email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and of course we are on Twitter and Facebook. 5:21. One woman was killed and 5 others injured by a man with suspected mental health issues who went on the rampage with a knife in central London. Police say the attack in Russell Square could be linked to terrorism, but only could. London Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner Mark Rowley took the unusual step of giving a news conference in the early hours of the morning.
Armed officers arrived at the scene within 5 minutes. They discharged a taser whilst confronting and arresting the suspect. 6 people have been injured, including the one woman who sadly died at the scene, and the others have received various injuries. A 19-year-old man was arrested shortly after 10:39 p.m. and is currently in police custody at hospital. Early indications suggest that mental health is a significant factor in this case, and that is one major line of inquiry. But of course at this stage we should keep an open mind regarding motive, and consequently terrorism as a motivation remains but one line of inquiry for us to explore. The Met's Homicide Command are investigating the incident, but at present are supported by our counter-terrorism unit. As a precautionary measure tomorrow, Londoners will wake up and in the morning they will notice an increased police presence on the streets, including armed officers. This is there to provide reassurance and safety. We ask the public to remain calm, vigilant and alert.
Assistant Commissioner Mark Rowley there at New Scotland Yard. Andy Moore is there right now. Andy, just one thing, whatever the motive here, people are bound to be hearing echoes of attacks in other cities recently. One thing perhaps we can clear up, there is no suggestion, I think, that there's more than one attack.
No, that's not the case. I was down at Russell Square earlier on, and it was being treated as a crime scene that was being investigated, but certainly not one that was ongoing. There's no sense of any alert ongoing in London, though, as you heard there from Mark Rowley, there will be a bigger police presence on the streets in the morning.
Andy, I know details are hard to come by at the moment. Clearly the police have said all they're prepared to say publicly at the moment. Are you getting any steers at all on the name, the nationality of the dead woman, any indication how seriously injured the injured people are, and where exactly in Russell Square this happened, whether it was on the street, whether it was in a cafe or a restaurant?
Well, the police said they wouldn't be naming the woman who died, a woman in her 60s, that's all we know. We don't know very much about those who were injured. As to where the attack happened, it happened apparently on the street, on the pavement, just opposite some hotels, next to a park. It was some distance from a tube station, so there's no indication that the tube station was targeted in any way. It seems to have been an attack in the open air on the street. Perhaps what's remarkable about it is that it happened 10:30 on a night in London. Normally social media would be full of rumours, stories, photographs about what had happened, but at the moment, remarkably little.
That remains the case. Speaking of social media, the BBC's Andy Moore in Russell Square, central London, talking to news anchor back in the BBC studio, Mike Embley. It's 25 minutes past 5. An Auckland man diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma for a second time is calling for a change to the law after work and income put him on a job seeker's benefit while undergoing chemotherapy. As an aside, we have somebody who has sent us an email saying the same thing happened to her son 15 years ago. We'll get back to that email. Kent Finley is an Auckland school teacher who was planning to head to the UK to teach, but a recent checkup revealed his cancer had returned, and over the next year he will undergo intensive chemotherapy followed by a bone marrow transplant. I spoke with Kent earlier and asked him where he stood with work and income.
Work and income put you on the job seeker benefit unless your treatment is going to last 2 years or more.
And so when you're on the job seeker benefit, what does work and income require of you, Kent?
Okay, so when you first go on it, they require you to look for work, but people in my situation, you can get some documentation from your health professionals. That means you don't have to work, but that's at your expense. You know, that's your time. You have to do it every 4 weeks for the first 2, and then every 13 weeks after that. It's a bit of a hassle, really.
So you're required to provide documentation saying you're still ill?
Yeah, definitely.
And
confirming your work capacity.
Okay. And if you don't provide that documentation, what happens?
So if you don't provide that, they'll require you to undertake sort of work seminars, apply for jobs, update your CV, keep them in the loop, all that sort of thing. And the thing is, even when you sign up for the job seeker benefit, when they know that you are going to provide them with this medical certificate, they still get you to fill out the paperwork as if you're looking for jobs, as if you're unable or unwilling to work.
So explain that to me. You obviously go in, you tell people you're ill, you provide the paperwork to support, the claims you're making around your health. You are receiving chemotherapy. The first course didn't work as well as you'd hoped, so you're going to have a second and more intensive course, and you're still being asked to sign the paperwork and apply for jobs.
Yeah, so you're asked what sort of skills do you have, what kind of work would you like to do, what's stopping you from finding work, and that's really quite patronising because the obvious answer is I have a career, I could find work if I was well, but I'm not in that position at the moment.
Kent, how much do you get a week from WINS?
So I've still got a few weeks until I get my first payment. That's due to getting some holiday pay from my last job. But when that does kick in, I'll be getting $210 a week.
$210 a week. Any accommodation supplement, any other support, or is that the totality of what you're receiving?
That's the totality. So they took my rent into consideration for that.
And what would you like to see happen? What would be the best response for you in a situation where you are unwell and the treatment is going to be over quite a prolonged period?
I would like you to provide a certificate at the start from your doctor, and that will say, I guess, how long your treatment's going to be, roughly. And then when your treatment's finished, someone from the hospital or someone can contact WINS. That would cut out all that unnecessary back and forth.
So that's Kent Finley. We asked the Ministry of Social Development for comment on Kent's case. The Auckland Regional Commissioner, Blair McKenzie, says because Kent received $4,000 in holiday pay from his last employer, he's not eligible for a benefit until next week. Mr McKenzie says it's apologised to Kent for originally miscalculating his benefit commencement date. Mr McKenzie says Kent's current medical certificate now means he won't be expected to work or actively look for a job. We started talking earlier about the fact we were going to have this interview tonight, and we received an email from Lynette Brook. Lynette writes, 15 years ago, my 22-year-old son was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. His oncologist filled in the section of the WINS form when he went to claim an invalid's benefit. In the section where he had to say when my son should be reassessing for job searching, he wrote, never. I still remember the crass way in which the person who interviewed him told him he should have to be reassessed in X number of months. I drew her attention to the oncologist's judgment that he should never be reassessed. That did not fit in the categories, I was told. For my son, who was struggling to come to terms with his diagnosis, it was a horrible experience, and I was upset and angry. Unfortunately, his oncologist judgment proved correct. My son died just over 3 years later. My experience has given me great sympathy for people who find wins difficult. That's Lynette writing about something that happened 15 years ago, and which has reasonably uncanny echoes with Kent's situation in 2016. Video filmed inside the cabin of a crashed Emirates Boeing 777 shows the chaos on board as passengers scrambled to evacuate via emergency chutes very fast. The flight from India caught fire after slumping onto the runway in Dubai. All 300 passengers and crew members survived, but 14 people were admitted to hospital. Here's Nathan Frandino from Reuters.
Officials say one firefighter was killed in the aftermath of the Emirates airline crash landing in Dubai on Wednesday. It was the sole fatality in the incident. All 300 passengers and crew were safely evacuated.
No, we were inside the plane when the cabin, when the smoke was there. Then immediately they evacuated.
The accident happened after the crew apparently attempted to abort the landing for a second attempt. Video showed flames bursting from the front of the plane and smoke billowing into the sky. Emirates airline chairman Sheikh Ahmed bin Saeed Al Maktoum says he doesn't believe there was a security breach.
I always rule out that there is anything in terms of security issue at this stage, and I don't think so.
It was the first major accident for the Dubai carrier since it was founded in the 1980s. The accident remains under investigation.
That report from Reuters. Coming up on Checkpoint, Katikati locals prepare to confront the Transport Minister Simon Bridges over a stretch of State Highway 2 where 5 Tongan workers died on Tuesday night. The Firefighters Union blacklists a new engine over safety fears. We go to Stephen Hewson in Rio. Nona is here ready to discuss business news. And here we go again, ladies and gentlemen. The Wellington Council votes for mandatory microchipping for cats. We do seem to have discussed this a lot, but it looks like they've made their minds up. But first, with RNZ headlines, here is Katrina Batten.
A major sponsor of the Chiefs says a stripper who claimed she was molested by players opened herself up to bad behaviour when she took her clothes off in a room of young men at a club party. The woman, known only as Scarlett, was hired to perform but says she was repeatedly touched despite her protests, sworn at and had gravel thrown at her. The Waikato company Gallagher has its name across the Chiefs jersey. Its corporate services executive Margaret Comer says the stripper also needs to take responsibility for her actions. The stripper says she tried to get the Chiefs to stop, but she was intimidated and thought it would end up worse for her if she called an end to the show. The bodies of 5 Tongan men killed in the Bay of Plenty earlier this week have been released back to their families. The men, 4 of which were in New Zealand on seasonal work visas, were leaving a kiwi fruit cool store near Katikati on Tuesday night when their car was hit by a truck on State Highway 2. The fire service is confident its trucks are safe despite firefighters blacklisting one that had more than 200 faults. Firefighters stopped using a brand new vehicle stationed at Auckland City, and others around the country are thinking about using older vehicles when heading to emergencies. The truck was the first of the fleet bought in January last year. The fire service says the issues were all minor, such as faulty door handles or throttles that have been replaced across the fleet. The threat of legal action has failed to stop Wellington City councillors from backing compulsory microchipping of all cats over 3 months old. The measure passed by 10 votes to 3 at a turbulent meeting of the council's Environmental Committee today. The amendment still has to be approved by the full council. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
A turbulent meeting, Katrina Batten. We'll have more on that later in Checkpoint. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who's sitting beside me. Nona, yesterday we talked about Briscoe and the fact that the retailing sector was going really well for them. Tonight, Kathmandu, what's the story?
Also the same story. It's
Right.
also going very well for them as well. So now, interestingly, Rod Duke does own 20% of Kathmandu.
So Rod Duke is the owner of Briscoe's, right?
Yes.
And Briscoe's own Briscoe's, you'll never buy better. Boom. And
Your
also,
song.
thanks very much. And also Rebel Sport.
That's right.
So he is a retailing king, this dude.
He is, and he wanted to take over Kathmandu last year. Some people might remember it was not a very good move because it failed, for one thing.
Yeah.
And partly because Rod Duke was offering about what worked out to $1.80 a share, which, by the way, is what Kathmandu has finally reached today. Yes, it's taken a while, but Kathmandu has come up with the goods. What they were doing was they were forecasting that they could really improve on their result from last year, which was quite poor. And they have delivered. They have exceeded their own expectations, even the ones that they were coming up with just like, say, a month ago. So the company has done very well.
So if we rewind, because at the time they said $1.80 wasn't enough, right?
They said $1.80 was nowhere near enough.
And actually, what today suggests is that...
well, they're actually at $1.83.
Yeah, so actually, vindication for Kathmandu, right?
Well, sort of. I mean, in a way, because now they've achieved what they said they would.
Under their own steam.
They're going to get, so now it's $1.83, but that's pretty much what Rod Duke was offering a year ago. So they said it wasn't enough. They said that the share price should be, actually, I went back into my files here. They said that it should be more like about $2.10 to $2.41. They got a way to go still. Never mind that. But anyhow, in any case, their share price rose 6% today. That's up 10 cents to $1.83, which I just said. And Briscoe Group, still riding the wave from yesterday, up another 6% today, up 19 cents to $3.55. And that actually was part of really an overall better tone to our market today. We rose 21 points, that's 0.3%, up to 7,298. I'm sorry, John, that's not a record.
Sorry, there's been so many of them lately, I'm over it. What about the dollar in advance of the Reserve Bank's announcement next week?
So, of course, now the U.S. dollar rebounded a bit. It's sort of picked up a bit of steam after some disappointing economic data. And a lot of what happens to the New Zealand dollar is really what happens to the U.S. dollar. So the U.S. dollar is a bit better. New Zealand dollar, not so much. We've slipped a little bit, 71.7 US cents, still very strong, 94.2 Australian and 53.8 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you. Let's go to the Bay of Plenty, where emotions are running high in and around the town of Katikati this evening as locals prepare to confront the Transport Minister about a stretch of State Highway 2 where 5 Tongan seasonal workers were killed in a crash. The men were leaving their work at a kiwi fruit cool store when their car was hit by an unladen logging truck on the highway on Tuesday night. It turns out lots of people have been sounding alarms about this stretch of road. Our reporter Tom Furley is in Katikati.
The bodies of the 5 men have been released by the coroner today. A seasonal employer liaison officer, Safita Hauli, arrived in Katikati this afternoon and has been in contact with the dead workers' families both in New Zealand and back in Tonga about what happens next.
It's been a couple of days now since the event, and I think things are beginning to settle down. The shock of it all has been replaced by now plans on what to do and I guess to look ahead and see what life would be like without, in this case, without their fathers.
Mr Hauli says the bodies of the 4 men who were here on seasonal work visas will be flown back to Tonga as soon as possible. The 5th, who was based in Auckland, will be buried there. The Tongan Prime Minister, Akalisi Pohiva, pulled out of his visit to meet the victims' families because of bad weather and the fact that the bodies had not, at that stage, been released. Safita Hauli says special preparations had been made for the visit and some of the families were disappointed.
We have to understand that, like everyone else, this was quite unexpected, and we know that he was here on state business and that he has a schedule of his own, but we unable to understand why it is that he's unable to join the small communities here in Katikati in their time of need.
The Tongan Prime Minister's office says he will visit the bereaved families when he returns to Tonga on Saturday. Rob Holding is the pastor of the Katikati Christian Centre, where tonight's community service is being held.
I think tonight's service is going to be a time of just people dealing with their feelings because everybody's pretty much in shock at the moment. So it's just a time to get together and be together and mourn those that are lost.
He says he expects hundreds of people at the service, which is expected to begin at 7:30 this evening. Many, like Community Board Deputy Chair and local vicar Brendan Gibbs, will be arriving straight from another community event where frustrations over the town's roads and planned bypass are due to be aired. While the focus will be on the amount of traffic travelling through the heart of the town, Mr Gibbs says the crash and concerns about safety on the state highway will be raised with Transport Minister Simon Bridges.
It'll certainly have impact because people are now saying, we've had enough. We don't want deaths on our roads. We try to be cautious. People will make mistakes and there will be accidents and unfortunately there will be sometimes deaths. But if our roads were more suitable for the sheer volume of traffic, I'm sure we would be able to reduce the road toll.
But for Kati Kati, tonight is also a time to formally mourn and remember the victims, with family and friends of the dead men travelling from around the country to attend the community service. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
20-6. For the first time in 20 years, the Firefighters Union has blacklisted a new engine over safety fears. The fire service has been forced to defend the use of its new fleet of vehicles after the firefighters say they have lost trust and confidence in the essential piece of equipment. More than 200 faults in the new line of appliances were reported across the country, and the fire service has spent more than a year trying to fix them. Mohammed Hassan reports.
The pump rescue tender vehicle stationed at Auckland's City Fire Station was the first of its fleet to be bought in January last year. The truck carries vital rescue equipment and is on the front lines of emergency call-outs. But over the last year and a half, faults have started appearing, from broken door handles to faulty throttles and water containers. The union's Northern Branch Secretary, Boyd Rains, says that's alarming and is putting lives at risk.
There is a risk to them in terms of if there's a loss of water whilst they're outside a burning building. The firefighters have lost their trust and confidence in an essential firefighting tool. That's causing them a lot of frustrations, like when a truck won't start to respond to a call, they feel a big sense of failure and anger.
When the Auckland City truck refused to start, the firefighters decided to blacklist it and go back to using an older, more reliable vehicle. It's the first time in 20 years such a drastic move has been taken, and Mr. Rains says it's sending a message about the rest of the fleet. He says other firefighters around the country are frustrated as well.
I've had it reported to me from various officers around the country that they at times consider not using it for a fire attack, knowing that there's the older trucks coming that they do trust, which in my 30-odd years in the fire service I've never heard of before.
He says the union has been working with the fire service to resolve the issues, but it's taken a long time and more problems keep arising. But the fire service says most of the issues, such as faulty door handles, were fixed and replaced across the fleet. The Auckland and Northland region manager, Kerry Gregory, says the blacklisted truck only needed a battery replacement, but for the firefighters it was the last straw.
They went to start it and it wouldn't start. From a firefighter's perspective, that is just totally unacceptable, and it's certainly nothing that we would want to happen. But the frustration that had been built up over a long period of time, fixing all the different little things to get it right, that frustration came to a head where it was like, okay, we're going to black the truck.
He says none of the problems in the vehicles raised any safety concerns at all, and is confident neither the firefighters nor the public are at any risk. But he says it's going to take time to win back that trust.
It's a hurdle that we're going to have to get over. How do we build the confidence back up of the frustrations that they've been having? And that will only come with time. People will get reassured as we get on top of all these issues and start getting the reliability that we expect from the truck. Then the confidence will build over that period of time for people.
He says the new trucks, which are custom built using parts from several local and international companies, are still under warranty, which has covered the repairs. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Mohammed Hassan tēnei.
A serious fraud office investigator has told the High Court in Wellington about searches done at the property of prominent Māori leader Sir Ngātata Love and elsewhere. Sir Ngātata, the former head of the Wellington Tents Trust, is before the court charged with fraudulently receiving $1.8 million in return for favouring an Auckland company's bid to create a development on some of the trust's land. However, the defence lawyer, Colin Carruthers QC, said in today's case, the SFO's theory is wrong. Our court reporter Anne-Marie May filed this report.
Shane Mannix, who's a serious fraud office investigator, said his team looked for any material relevant to the investigation, and 7 boxes containing more than 11,000 documents were taken to Auckland for further investigation. He said an email from Sir Ngatata's partner Lorraine Skiffington discussed prospective property developments in Wellington, including the need for some degree of clarity about matters connected with the deal.
We obviously have to talk about access/upfront fees, as Ngatata discussed earlier. He is expecting to see a significant chuck of resourcing upfront that will assist to kickstart the projects at our end. This can be, of course, integrated into a final profit share.
Mr Mannix said the SFO also checked through meeting minutes from the 10th Trust to see if there was any mention of the involvement of the defendant's son, Martene Love, in the development. However, neither he nor his company were mentioned. Mr Mannix said despite her involvement in the development, Lorraine Skiffington did not figure in the meeting minutes either.
There is no mention of her in relation to any of the subsequent building projects that took place, including Pipitea Street. There is no mention of Pipitea Street Developments Limited. There is no record of Lorraine Skiffington ever attending any trustee meetings.
However, the defence lawyer Colin Carruthers QC put it to Mr Mannix that payments made under a services agreement between the developers and Ms Skiffington could have no possible effect on the 10th Trust. The witness said looking at just one document in isolation that was correct, but the SFO's theory was not based on that one document alone. Mr Mannix appeared confused when asked what his investigation had revealed about the relationship between Sir Ngatata and Lorraine Skiffington.
You established that it was in the nature of a mature platonic relationship, didn't you?
Mature platonic relationship?
Yeah.
So I could just put that in sort of layman's terms?
That's as layman as I could possibly get it. That they lived in the same house, they shared that house, but they lived in separate parts of the house?
Yes.
Mr Mannix agreed that the relationship was different from what he had initially imagined it to be. Another witness from the Serious Fraud Office is now giving evidence. The trial is expected to run until the middle of August. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Gosh, we're getting a lot of feedback tonight. Thank you all. Lots of it on the Chiefs and what's going on there. We'll have more on that later in Checkpoint, but also a surprising amount of feedback on wins and having to prove you're sick in order to keep getting a benefit. How sick do you have to be before that stops? Hi, John. Our 8-year-old was diagnosed with leukemia this year. We were told by the oncologist that we were entitled to a non-means test, $45 a week from WINS to cover miscellaneous costs. It was our family's first interaction with WINS. We were stunned by how rude and belligerent the staff were. We were treated with utter contempt and the process was made as difficult as possible. I have real sympathy for people who have to deal with WINS on a regular basis. I hope I never have to step foot in the place again. Kind regards, Hamish. Thank you, Hamish. And lots of feedback along those lines. John, I know someone in a wheelchair with spina bifida. WINS requires to be medically reassessed in case she's miraculously cured. The woman will never walk. WINS thinks miracles happen. And I very much sympathise with this man. My friend has epilepsy, has had since he's 15. He's on a job seeker benefit because he's not epileptic enough. There are people who don't want to work. Then there are those who simply can't. Thank you for all your feedback. New Zealand's Olympic Games have begun with the women's football team losing 2-0 to the United States. To put that defeat in context, the US women's team have now won their past 12 Olympic matches in a row. That's how good they are. But with the Games officially getting underway with the opening ceremony in just over 36 hours from now, the question, as it always does at this time in the Olympic cycle, turns to who'll be carrying the flag. I spoke to our sports editor, Stephen Hewson, who's in Rio earlier this afternoon.
Tomorrow night, or Friday morning, New Zealand time, John, the New Zealand team will name their flag bearer, and I suppose there's been a fair bit of thought going into that process, a few names being thrown up, and I suppose one of the leading contenders would have to be Hamish Bond, who won gold with Eric Murray in the pair at the London Games. In this team, of course, with New Zealand, there's several former flag bearers. We've got the likes of Val Adams, who was at the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. We've got Nick Willis, who was the flag bearer in London, although that didn't seem to bode terribly well for him form-wise when he finished well back in the field in the final of the 1,500 metres. And Mahi Drysdale, of course, he was the flag bearer in Beijing, and that didn't go too well for him either because he came down crook, or very crook, and with a valiant effort finished third with a bronze medal in the single scull. So I mean, Hamish Bond, Eric Murray, I mean, Hamish Bond would seem to be not a bad choice given the hot favouritism of them going into their event. The rowing gets underway on Saturday, and they're in heats here for first up on that Saturday. But the first athlete, I suppose, to compete in Rio will be Mahi Drysdale. Of course, we've got the women's football team. They kicked things off, but they played at Belo Horizonte against the United States. They lost that match 2-0. Not a bad effort against the world number one, but Belo Horizonte is about 250 kilometres sort of away from Brazil. So technically, Mahi Drysdale will be the one that gets things underway for New Zealand on Saturday morning, Rio time. John.
Stephen, can we talk about the Sevens team and where they are at with their juggling act around personnel?
Yeah, well, they've lost Teddy Stanaway. He's out. He fractured his hand when playing in a warm-up match against the United States. So they've called in Lewis Ormond. He's on his way to Rio. And also going to be coming over is Liam Messam. He's just on standby, but he will come in to Rio and join the side. Of course, he missed out on the initial squad. Big interest today, though, Sonny Bill Williams. He was the star attraction at the media conference for the Sevens side. There must have been 15 or so international TV crews there, and they pretty much hung on every word that Sonny Bill had to say. It was his birthday today, so quite a way to, I suppose, join the Rio Olympics on your birthday. He said he's been quite impressed by the food hall and the free takeaways on offer, but of course that's all off the menu as far as the Sevens are concerned, especially if Gordon Titchens has got his eye on them. But yeah, he's sort of been in awe of sort of the athletes around him and taking it all in. Of course, his sister is in the women's Sevens team. And he was saying that he's actually spent more time catching up with her than he quite possibly had at any other stage.
Stephen, can we talk a question? Because everyone is talking about Mark Todd being 60, and it is extraordinary that he is still at the top of his sport. But in fact, he's not the oldest equestrian competitor at the Olympics, is he?
No, not for the New Zealand team. The dressage rider, Julia Browham, 62. She keeps that pretty quiet because that only came out when we initially thought that Mark Todd was, in fact, the oldest Olympian in the New Zealand team this time around. But she said no, she liked to keep her age very on the down low. But yeah, so he started out in 1984, and she's just now making her Olympic debut here in
Wonderful.
Rio. So it's quite the. It is, especially when Mark Todd says he's now competing against many of some of the children of people that he used to compete against. He's maybe not quite, still got some way to go to be the oldest equestrian Olympian, because there was a Japanese equestrian rider who competed in Tokyo in the 60s, and then he made it to London in 2012, and he was about 72 when he competed in London. So Mark Todd's got a little way to go yet to be the oldest equestrian Olympian at least.
Stephen, for people who are listening on the radio, there's gloriously happy chatter underneath you. Now, I'm watching and I can see where you are, but can you describe where you are and what's going on there?
Yeah, we're on Copacabana Beach in the middle of winter, which is about 22, 23 degrees here in Rio, so that counts as the middle of winter. It's also the dry season. But yeah, so there's about, I'm not quite sure if you can see them just out off my shoulder here. There must be about 30 or 40 people. They're standing in front of the Olympic rings and getting their photos taken. This is a spot along Copacabana Beach where people can come out and sort of try and enjoy some of the Olympic spirit in obviously what is quite an impressive part of Rio, but one of the world's greatest tourist spots, of course, as well. So yeah, people coming along and sort of just embracing the whole feeling of the games as things start to really kick off.
Stephen Hewson from Rio. Ticket scalping may be legal, but it is the bane of many a fan's life. It happened in last year's Super Rugby final, and again this year some fans were left bereft after tickets for the Saturday's final between the Hurricanes and the Lions were snapped up in a very short amount of time, and then some of them immediately on-sold to the highest bidder online. Now TradeMe is calling for ticket companies themselves to impose tougher restrictions on the sale of bulk tickets, and the online auction site says it's thought long and hard about whether it would just be easier for it to ban the sale of all tickets. Perhaps they could do so unless they were being sold at face value, possibly. Anyway, Kate Gudsall reports.
As far as ticket scalping goes, TradeMe follows the letter of the law. The auction website's head of trust and safety, John Duffy, says that some events can be declared as nationally significant. If this happens, then tickets cannot be legally on-sold for more than face value. However, other events, like the rugby match this weekend, don't meet that bar. He says Trade Me is a trading platform and he doesn't see any reason not to on-sell tickets.
We get a lot of heat regularly around ticket scalping, and we've thought long and hard about whether it would just be simpler for us to ban the sale of all tickets. But we provide a really important service when events aren't sold out and people can't get rid of their tickets.
John Duffy says Trade Me is a secondary market and changes should be made by the ticketing companies themselves.
All of these tickets have been sourced through one of the ticketing companies. We'd actually like to see some better controls put in at that stage to restrict the flow of bulk tickets to people who I guess are labelled scalpers. I mean, for example, we've got a seller on this site at the moment going through our security checks who has many tickets to this game.
On the streets of the capital, which is hosting this year's final, people aren't impressed.
If you've got people scalping them, then how are other people in Wellington going to actually get into the bloody game?
You know, fair enough buying a few tickets for the family and stuff, but I mean, if you're just buying it for monetary gains, it's a bit unfair, you know.
I don't think it's fair on the people that would have wanted to have, you know, the chance to buy tickets before they get to be past their, you know, ability to buy it.
Trade Me should stop selling the tickets online and scalping and that.
Oh, it's silly. It's disgusting.
It's not fair.
It's not fair, yeah.
The Hurricanes coach, Chris Boyd, says it's disappointing.
The organisation's tried really hard to reward our supporters as much as we can with the opportunity to come to finals, and I think we've also tried to reward the general public and those people that were queued up. Scalping's disappointing when people genuinely want to get tickets for their personal use, so we certainly don't support it.
The Hurricanes chief executive, Avon Lee, has taken matters into his own hands. He and others have rung a number of scalpers directly, telling them what they're doing flies in the face of the rugby team's terms and conditions.
In fairness, the ones that I've spoken to have either taken them down or taken them back to face value. So I commend their attitude. They haven't been difficult. Some people are a little bit harder to catch than others, but look, at the end of the day, our focus is about our fans.
Avon Lee says it's frustrating some have chosen to take advantage, but there are lessons to be learnt. Both he and Trade Me say the number of scalped tickets represent just a tiny fraction of the tickets sold. Ticketek has not responded to requests for comment. For Chatpoint, call Kate Gudsell 10A.
There were fiery scenes at Wellington City Council today as councillors voted in favour of compulsory microchipping of cats in the city. The capital will be the first city in New Zealand to make microchipping mandatory. Our reporter Emile Donovan was at the committee meeting, which was, well, confusing for some.
And there should have been. There should be.
Councillor, I'm sorry. Councillor, that is the amendment I have said. No, Councillor, that is for the dog policy.
There was turbulence today at a Wellington City Council Environment Committee meeting as councillors clashed over a proposal to make microchipping compulsory for all cats over 12 weeks old. Supporters say microchipping is a way of ensuring all domestic cats can be identified and connected with an owner. They also say it will protect local wildlife as it helps to distinguish between domestic, stray and feral cats. Ray Ahipene Mercer said the decision was a no-brainer.
And we go on about bringing people to the city to see this, to see that, to see the birds and everything else. But here is a mechanism which will enable us to better manage the issues to do with the killing of wildlife.
While Simon Wolfe, who introduced the amendment, said the council needed to stand up and set an example.
This allows us to identify our pets as opposed to cats that are feral or stray. Let's just do this, let's lead, let's not be risk averse to this, and let's provide some absolutely necessary leadership.
But not everyone saw it that way. Joe Coughlin said councillors hadn't been given enough time to consider the repercussions of compulsory microchipping.
I do feel like it's been rammed through a bit. I have spoken previously around the benefits of microchipping. I've had personally a great experience with that. But whether I actually feel at this point that we should be making that mandatory for all at costs which we don't know enough about, I'm not sure.
Ultimately, the committee voted to accept the amendment by 10 votes to 3, with dissenting votes cast by Joe Coughlin, Helene Ritchie and Nicola Young. But it's not a done deal quite yet. The amendment still has to be accepted by the full council, which will meet on August 17th. For Checkpoint, ko Emile Donovan Tene.
Coming up to the news at 6, Katrina Batten is sitting beside me ready to do it. Just before then, feedback, fairly representative sample of feedback on the Chiefs. The culture of the Chiefs seems rotten from the top down. Margaret from Gallagher and Andrew, the manager, need to step down from their respective jobs as they have no respect for women. It doesn't matter that Scarlett is a stripper, it's her job, and she was employed to strip in front of a pack of louts, not be molested, abused and ripped off by them. I don't understand how it can be okay for Margaret to denigrate this woman and keep her job. Is it because she's a woman too? That makes it worse, in my opinion. We should say, of course, that the Chiefs have launched an investigation into what exactly happened on Monday at those hot pools. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National, on the radio as always, but we're also screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website. However you're doing so, thank you for joining us. A major sponsor of the Chiefs is standing by the rugby franchise after an investigation was launched into claims players swore, threw gravel and inappropriately touched a stripper at an end-of-season party. But now there's controversy over the sponsor's comments after Gallagher said it wasn't wise for the stripper to strip in a room of young men and not expect something annoying to happen. Also in the next 30 minutes, a woman is dead and 5 others injured after a stabbing in London, and the Deputy Prime Minister Bill English drops in on a Hutt Valley secondary school for some policy advice. All of that coming up, but first the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. A major sponsor of the Chiefs says a stripper opened herself up to bad behaviour when she took off her clothes in a room of young men. The woman, known only as Scarlett, says she was sworn at, repeatedly touched despite her protests, and had gravel thrown at her. The Waikato company Gallagher has its name across the Chiefs jersey. Its corporate services executive, Margaret Comas, says the allegations are not in keeping with the company's ethics and values. But she says the stripper needs to take some responsibility. Mrs. Coma, who's also on the board of the Waikato Women's Refuge, says the stripper needs to take some responsibility.
I'm also torn between, if you choose to take your clothes off in a room of young men, you really are opening yourself up for behaviour that is not nice.
Margaret Coma from the chief sponsor Gallagher. The stripper, meanwhile, says she felt frightened and intimidated. Scarlett says she was surrounded by drunk players but thought it would end up worse for her if she called an end to the show.
It's sexual abuse, basically. If someone is saying no to you, it means no. It's regardless whether you're a sex worker or not. It's not acceptable to rape a prostitute, so why is it acceptable to touch a stripper?
Scarlett says she's not planning to complain to the police. A local community leader says he's disappointed Tonga's Prime Minister cancelled his trip to Katikati to visit the families of 5 Tongan workers killed in a car crash. The Prime Minister, Akalisi Pohiva, who's visiting New Zealand, was expected to meet with family members and attend a community remembrance service in Katikati. However, his office says the plan was cancelled because they were advised not to fly due to bad weather. The chair of the Tongan Advisory Council Board, Malino Maka, says the visit should have been the top priority.
This is one of the saddest things for our Tongan community, and especially the Katikati Tongan community. You need to understand that when a tragic event like this, you as a Prime Minister need to drop everything and try to be with the family and make sure that the family know that you're there to support them during this difficult time.
Malino Maka of the Tongan Advisory Council Board. The relationship of a prominent Māori leader accused of property fraud has come in for some close scrutiny at his High Court trial in Wellington. Sir Ngatata Love, the former head of the Wellington Tents Trust, is charged with fraudulently receiving almost $2 million and returning for favouring an Auckland company's bid to create a development on some of the Trust's land. Charges against his partner, Lorraine Skiffington, were dropped due to her ill health. The Serious Fraud Office investigator Shane Mannix appeared confused when asked about the couple's relationship.
You established that it was in the nature of a mature platonic relationship, didn't you?
Mature platonic relationship?
Yeah.
So I could just put that in sort of layman's terms?
That's as layman as I could possibly get it. That they lived in the same house, they shared that house, but they lived in separate parts of the house?
Yes.
Shane Mannix agreed the relationship was different from what he had initially imagined it to be. There were fiery scenes at Wellington City Council today as councillors voted in favour of compulsory microchipping for cats. The amendment would apply to all cats more than 12 weeks old in Wellington City and would take full effect in 2018. Ultimately, the amendment passed by 10 votes to 3 after a frank exchange of views between councillors. A councillor and mayoral candidate, Jo Coughlin, said she was concerned by how quickly the amendment was passed.
I do feel like it's been rammed through a bit. I have spoken previously around the benefits of microchipping. I've had personally a great experience with that. But whether I actually feel at this point that we should be making that mandatory for all at costs which we don't know enough about, I'm not sure.
Wellington City Councillor Jo Coughlin. The bylaw will be voted on by the full council later this month. A group of secondary school students has urged the Deputy Prime Minister, Bill English, to give school decile numbers the chop. Mr English visited Taita College in the Hutt Valley today to ask students how the government can help children from disadvantaged backgrounds succeed. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Earlier this year, Mr English said the government should be asking 16-year-olds from the Lower Hutt suburb of Pomare why they succeeded at school. A group of high-achieving students from Taita College were only too happy to help him with that. Today they told him life is hard for some people in the area. They said after-school homework sessions, personal commitment from teachers and a strong sense of family helped them to do well. They also told Bill English that the decile system unfairly stigmatises students and discourages them. This is John Gerritsen.
In sport, the All Blacks flanker Sam Cane has been told to stay at home as he recovers from a head knock suffered in the Chiefs Super Rugby loss to the Hurricanes last weekend. Cane was meant to join the All Blacks camp this week, but he's been given extra time to recover. New Zealand's coach Steve Hansen says Cane is showing signs of concussion and will be monitored closely.
We won't play him if there's any risk, so Doc will manage that process with Sam and we'll give him as much time as he needs to come right, and when he's right then he'll be available for selection.
Steve Hansen. The Hurricanes captain Dane Coles rates himself an 80% chance to play Saturday night's Super Rugby final against the Lions in Wellington. The hooker missed last weekend's semi-final win over the Chiefs with a rib cartilage injury and has been bracketed alongside Ricky Ratelli to start. Meanwhile, the Blues coach Tana Umanga says next year's inaugural Global Tens competition in Brisbane will provide a good warm-up to the Super Rugby season. Launching in February, all 10 Australian and New Zealand franchises will feature, plus 4 teams from around the world. Umanga says it will test each team's fitness.
Sometimes the pre-season, it's not so much how many games you have, it's really about what you want to get out of it. And I think sides now, they just want to get the boys accustomed to playing rugby again. You know, you can do all the training you want, but playing games is really where you get your fitness and you get the measures of how you're going.
Tana Umanga, that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a historic Central Auckland walking tour with Edward Bennett continues. This evening, Pitt Street. Our changing world puts the government's vision for a predator-free New Zealand under the scientific spotlight. And Paul Barrington continues the story of electronic music. This evening, the rave scene in Belgium. On Nights, from Brussels with Beats, not Sprouts. After the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow, all of the North Island except for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Rain or showers with isolated heavy falls, snow lowering to 600 metres about the central high country overnight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, a few showers turning to rain this evening with some heavy falls tomorrow. The snow level is lowering to 600 metres tomorrow and that'll affect the Napier-Taupo Road. Nelson and Buller through to Fiordland, fine apart from scattered rain with snow above 800 metres in Nelson and Buller clearing this evening. For the remainder of the South Island, occasional rain or showers with snow above 300 metres in Marlborough and to lower levels elsewhere. The Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's 6:08.
Thanks, Katrina. A major sponsor of the Chiefs is standing by the franchise after an investigation was launched into claims players swore through gravel and inappropriately touched a stripper at an end-of-season party. The stripper was hired on the same evening that Chiefs player Michael Allardyce made a homophobic comment that a man and his partner believe was directed at them. The stripper, who wants to be called Scarlett, says that she was intimidated and scared after her experience at the Mad Monday function near Tiro in Waikato. But the manager of the hotel where the event took place insists partygoers were not too drunk or badly behaved. Sharon Britt-Kelly reports.
The Chiefs' boss, Andrew Flexman, says the franchise does not condone the hiring of a stripper and it takes the allegations seriously.
I can assure you all that we're extremely disappointed, as I said, with the action in engaging that particular performer.
Mr Flexman says appropriate action will be taken if the allegations are substantiated. He also told media at a press conference this afternoon he regrets his earlier comments that Scarlett's standing in the community and culpability were not beyond reproach.
As a person and the values that I have, given the vocation that this particular woman is involved in, do I cast aspersions on her as a person as a result of that vocation? That's just simply not what I believe in.
Mr Flexman would not confirm if senior players were involved and says to the best of his knowledge, strippers are not normally hired for Chiefs functions. But he walked away when asked about Scarlett's claim that the players wanted her to behave like a prostitute and that they had shortchanged her. Scarlett says she walked into a room full of about 40 drunk men on Monday night and they immediately closed in on her.
They were encouraging the players to do horrible things to me as I'd go towards each one. There was one guy that I repeatedly told to stop touching me. I hit him in the genitals, in the face, and proceeded to slam his head into the ground to enforce that I meant no.
She says she repeatedly told the men not to touch her, but about 5 of them were overly sexually aggressive. She says she would normally stop the show, but in this case she felt that would have made things worse.
It's sexual abuse, basically. If someone is saying no to you, it means no. It's regardless whether you're a sex worker or not. It's not acceptable to rape a prostitute, so why is it acceptable to touch a stripper?
Scarlett says she thought about going to the police, but she had found them difficult to deal with in the past. She says there were no women, management or hotel staff present. The hotel manager, Kushla Wood, says she left an hour before the stripper arrived, but she found the players polite and courteous.
They were loud and hooing and laughing and trying to sing. But no, there wasn't anybody that was specifically drunk or anything like that I saw. Anyone that was getting loud, as I said, one of the older guys took them out.
Waikato company Gallagher is a major sponsor of the Chiefs. Its corporate services executive, Margaret Comer, says the players were crazy to have hired a stripper, but Scarlett also needs to take responsibility.
Don't take your clothes off. Stand in a room of young 20 to 25-year men and, don't and not expect something to be annoying or because you've said no.
But out on the street, people spoken to by RNZ News supported Scarlett.
Strippers is one thing, but, degrading them is another.
Displaying that sort of behaviour is just kind of setting a bad example to the younger generation.
Put it this way, imagine if it was your daughter.
If they're representing their region or something, then they're representing the people of that region. I think that's a little bit inappropriate.
They're role models for young children, so I don't think it's a good idea at all.
The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says he would be very disappointed if the allegations were true. He says players should not be having Mad Mondays anymore, but it was not up to him to make that decision. Scarlett, meanwhile, would like a personal apology from the players, to be paid the full amount for her work, and for the men to realise their behaviour is not acceptable. For Checkpoint, Sharon Britt-Kelly.
Well, the Chiefs' naming rights sponsor is Waikato company Gallagher. We spoke to its sponsorship and community executive, Margaret Comer, earlier in the program. And you will have heard some of that interview in Sharon's story, saying it wasn't wise for Scarlett to strip in a room of young men and not expect something annoying to happen. Ms Comer is a trustee of Waikato's Women's Refuge, Te Whakaruruhau, We approached them for comment tonight, but the management there referred us to their chair, Anna Stretton, who's yet to return our calls. Joining us now is Dr. Ange Jury, who is the Chief Executive of the National Women's Refuge Collective. Dr. Jury, thank you so much for joining us on Checkpoint. Have you been listening to all of this over the past hour or so?
Yeah, I have been listening to it.
And what do you make of it all?
First thing I want to say is that I'm really pleased to hear some of those comments from the people on the street that your program's just spoken to. That gives me a little bit of heart that your average person on the street is actually getting the message.
So the confusion seems to be around the fact that if you are a stripper, you are putting yourself at risk when you strip. And that seemed on the face of it to be the suggestion from Margaret Comer, who said, that if you go and strip in front of a room of young men, you should expect something to happen.
Yeah, that sort of attitude, I think, is something that fortunately we're starting to lose. If you're hired as a stripper, you're hired to take your clothes off. That's not a license to touch. Absolutely and utterly not a license to touch. It's just simply not good enough.
Are you surprised by all of this? Are you surprised by the Mad Monday thing? And we should say that these allegations are being investigated. But are you surprised that this sort of thing is still taking place? And I heard Steve Hansen say, actually, it's just time to move on from this stuff. What do you make of it all?
Well, I think I agree with, excuse me, I agree with Steve Hansen entirely. It's this sort of stuff, this sort of culture is something that we just do need to leave behind. If we're ever going to make a difference in our violence against women stats in this country, and they are appalling, we need to just knock this sort of stuff on the head completely, just leave it in the past where it belongs. There's just no place for it anymore.
And to the people who were saying, and they're not talking, they're just talking about the specific incident, and we're receiving this feedback. People are saying, get over it, it's PC gone mad. There was some.
No, it's not. It's not PC gone mad at all, John, and we're faced with this all the time. But when we make comment about stuff like this, but when you pick up the pieces of the lives of the women who have been impacted by this stuff, it is not PC at all. This sort of stuff has real consequences for the lives of women and children in this country. And as one of the people that you spoke to on the street said, what about it if it was your sister or your daughter or your granddaughter? It gives people have the ability to somehow objectify a person and say that that's nothing to do with me. That woman has nothing to do with me or my family. And they do. That woman is representative of all women in New Zealand. And if we can keep her safe, we've got a better chance of keeping other women safe.
So one final question. What would you say to the chiefs and the people who were there who stand accused of participating in this and the sponsor about all of this as it's unfolded today and as it unfolded on Monday?
I think they need to stop and have a really, really good look at the culture that's obviously being fostered there. They need to do some domestic and family and sexual violence 101 training. They need to think about how their behaviour and their comments reflect or are perceived by the rest of the world and the rest of their community, and the sort of behaviours that it sort of encourages.
Dr. Ange Jury, National Women's Refuge Collective CEO, thank you very much indeed for joining us live on the phone on Checkpoint. Let's go to London. One woman was killed and 5 others injured by a man with suspected mental health issues who went on a rampage with a knife in central London. This report from Reuters.
At least one person is dead and at least 5 others are injured after a stabbing attack in a central London square Wednesday evening. Police say a 19-year-old man wielding a knife began stabbing people in Russell Square. Assistant Metropolitan Police Commissioner Mark Rowley said officers were investigating both mental health and terrorism as possible motivations.
Early indications suggest that mental health is a significant factor in this case, and that is one major line of inquiry. But of course at this stage we should keep an open mind regarding motive, and consequently terrorism as a motivation remains but one line of inquiry for us to explore. At present, the Met's Homicide Command are investigating the incident, but at present are supported by our counter-terrorism unit.
Rowley said an increased police presence will be visible in the morning, including armed officers. He's urging the public to remain calm, vigilant and alert.
Home again. The Deputy Prime Minister Bill English dropped in on a Hutt Valley secondary school today for a bit of policy advice. Earlier this year, Mr English said he should be asking teenagers from one of the Valley's low-income areas how they succeed at school. A group of high-achieving students at Taita College put their hands up, so our education correspondent John Gerritsen went along to see what they had to say.
Taita College is a small, low-decile secondary school toward the top end of the Hutt Valley. Kaisa Fatui told Bill English he's proud of his school, but life isn't easy for a lot of people in the area.
It's difficult for students here, especially since for some that they're ending up fighting wars on two fronts, which is one at home and one at school. It's kind of difficult to sugarcoat the conditions that some people have to go through in Taita and in Nainai.
Kaiser and the other 8 students in the group say Taita College helps them a lot through after-school homework sessions, personal commitment from teachers and a strong sense of community. Mr English wanted to know how to reach struggling students, and the school's head girl, Susanna Bryce Alapati, says family is the key, especially for those from Pacifica backgrounds.
So if you wanted an example of how to get to those students that are down in the deep end, just be like, what would your mum say? What would your mum think of you? What would your grandpa think of you? And then immediately they'll be like, okay, yeah, nah, I'm going to do the best that I can do. When their whole persona just changes because they have their family at heart, especially their parents.
But if there's one thing that really bugs students at Taita College, it's the decile system, which allocates schools a number based on the number of students they enrol from the most disadvantaged areas. Tessa Porter says a low decile number places an unwanted and unnecessary stigma on a school and its students.
It's kind of sad to have this label stuck, and then it maybe demoralise you as well, because you say, well, if other people say I can't really do that because I'm in this community and in this area, then it's just difficult.
Mr English says the criticism of the decile system struck a chord with him, and overall he was impressed.
The other thing that struck me is just the determination. I mean, these kids are really motivated, not just about themselves, but as demonstrated in the discussion about the school as a community and the kids within it who need more support than they need.
Tegan Tutala Hanita and Susanna Bryce Alapati say they hope the Deputy Prime Minister left with a better understanding of them and their community.
If he understands us, he'll understand the community and other schools that are like us.
And won't just judge us based on our decile. And it's not based on the labels that people put us in and the assumptions, but it's actually based on the individuals and the school itself.
And they also really hope that Mr English's government gets rid of that school decile number. It's a label they say they could really do without. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
I just received a text, I think, from Mike, who says, I love the advice from the chief sponsor, don't take your clothes off, makes it hard to be a stripper. Maybe the Chiefs should play without a ball. It's 22 minutes past 6. Black has been exchanged for blue. Former All Black Glenn Osborne was one of 60 new police officers who graduated as constables today. Speaking after the graduation ceremony at the Police College in Porirua, the 44-year-old said without a doubt his biggest challenge entering the force was having to study again.
I spent 30 years with no study at all, really just reading books and bits and pieces, so it was probably the most hardest thing I've ever done in my life, is getting back into the study, all the liabilities, the law that's involved with being a police officer, and just trying to understand what the whole process is all about. That, without a doubt, is the biggest hurdle I've ever faced in my lifetime.
Yeah, because you mentioned, I think, in a newspaper article last year about your literacy, your English at high school wasn't particularly great.
Oh, no, it wasn't. I don't mind saying this. I got about 13% in school C English, so Obviously, I've had to work really hard. I have wonderful people, support people back in Wanganui. It's taken me a while, but yeah, like I said before, trying to understand the values of the police, but just trying to learn. The hardest thing when I arrived here is I had no idea how to study, so I had to learn in a very short time how to study so I could study the information. And that was, for me, the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole life.
What's it like at 44? You must have been one of the older recruits as well. Do you don't mind my saying so? What was that like?
Yeah, you get that in television. I look like one of the oldest ones. No, for myself, with all the fitness training that we did, I was in the top 3 in all of them. So long as I could hold my own with all the younger ones, no one can really say anything, you know. I've always been a bit of a fitness freak sort of guy, so long as I keep up to those standards, I believe, with my experience, and I believe with a little bit of wisdom behind me, I do think that I'll be a good value for the police.
Glenn Osborne, if you were listening to that rather than watching it, you won't know that he still looks as slim and as fit as he did when he was an All Black. In a sporting coincidence, the former All Blacks coach John Hart was the patron of the 298 recruit wing. He says he was honoured to be asked and didn't know at the time that Glenn Osborne was on the course. Hart said All Blacks past and present would be proud of Constable Osborne. The difference between winning and losing at the Rio Olympics will come down to hundredths, possibly even thousandths of a second for some athletes. Talent and good coaching will make athletes medal contenders, but the difference between gold and silver and bronze, could be technology. As Matt Chatterton reports, a lot of money has been poured into giving New Zealand athletes the tools they need to succeed at Rio.
Sailing and cycling are two of New Zealand's most successful Olympic sports, winning the country 25 medals, 9 of those gold. Those events, like many others at the Olympics, require a lot of technological innovation to help give athletes an edge over their competitors. That's where High Performance Sport New Zealand steps in. Its technology and innovation program is dedicated to finding new ways to improve athletes' performances. $1.5 million is pumped into the program every year to improve the country's chances on the world sporting stage. The innovation manager at High Performance Sport New Zealand, Matt McKerrow, says his job is about finding sustainable ways for athletes to consistently succeed for years to come.
There's no such thing as a silver bullet. There's no one piece of technology that you can introduce tomorrow that's going to make a massive gain. It's about doing it over time. It's about understanding what's important within the individual sport and what impacts performance, and measuring over time improvement and using that longitudinal data to make better decisions. So in the yachting example, we've now got cycles of data of training information and wind gear and some of the other things you've seen at the event here today, and it's just about giving the athletes and the coaches as much as they can have to make the best decisions and ultimately to squeeze every last inch out of that performance.
Some of the tools High Performance Sport New Zealand has invested in are as simple as the GoPro, the action sports camera that's designed for extreme conditions. In yachting, they're used to record information about how various sails perform during racing. New Zealand Sailing's High Performance Director Jez Vanstone says the GoPro actually saves the organisation money in the long run.
There are certain classes where you can make your own sails and make your own changes, and so it stops you having to go through a whole raft of different sails. You can use one and maybe even change it and then go out and film it again. And so people coming into the class, for example, the fin. The laser, they've often come from the laser and it's a different rig and a different way of sailing, and it helps them understand their controls a bit quicker.
At the other end of the technology spectrum is Southern Spa. They are the company designing and building Team New Zealand's catamaran for next year's America's Cup. Southern Spa also designed the bikes for the New Zealand track cycling team. Cycling is a sport that comes down to the narrowest of margins. Something Cycling New Zealand's High Performance Director Mark Elliott says the women's pursuit team experienced firsthand at this year's World Championships.
Our women lost the opportunity to ride for gold and silver by 0.003 of a second, I think, which equated to about 10 centimetres over a 4,000 metre pursuit. So when you're talking about athletes, their careers or their futures being defined by hundreds and thousandth of a second, then it's up to us as a program to make sure that they've got the right equipment to optimise their performance.
Historically, countries such as Great Britain and Australia have had better cycling technology than New Zealand, but Elliott says that gap is closing quickly. He says technology isn't just crucial for athletes, but also the coaching staff who break down the terabytes of data collected. The athletes themselves help select which innovations they use, which Elliott says is crucial to success.
There's a lot of knowledge that sits in that team and understanding the sport, and therefore you combine that great technical expertise from the carbon fibre experts and the wind tunnel designers and etc., and you put that with the athletes. That's what makes it special, and I think that's where the athletes, when they're fronting up on the line, they own what they're riding and they have been a part of designing what they're riding, and that's the psychological edge. And for us, I think that really puts us in probably the best position we've been as a cycling program in the last 2 Olympic cycles.
While confidence is key, learning from the innovative tools is just as important for the athletes. New Zealand sailor Michael Wilkinson says without the advancements in technology, his development would be a lot slower.
When we go sailing, it can be quite easy to just go sailing and, practice your moves, and but being able to record what you've done, and especially with the Training Peaks app, look back on what you've done and kind of reflect and debrief, and you can really kind of get a really good understanding of what you've done and learn out of it rather than just go through the motions as such.
7 seconds delay here.
With new innovations already in the works for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, athletes like Wilkinson are well on their way to breaking new ground. For Checkpoint, Matt Chatterton Tine.
Matt Chatterton, who wanted me to tell you that he will be yelling very loudly for the Hurricanes on Saturday night. He may not have wanted me to tell you that. That he'll be doing that, but I'm sure you will, Matt. That's the show for this evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5. Until then, a very good evening indeed.
Says she felt frightened and intimidated by Chiefs rugby players who says swore at her and molested her. The death of a man whose body was found on a boat in Nelson this morning has been treated as suspicious by the police. An Auckland man who's fighting his second bout of Hodgkin's lymphoma says work and income has forced him repeatedly to prove he can't work because of his illness. And Wellington City councillors have voted to make microchipping compulsory for all cats over 3 months old. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This Saturday morning, as Rio opens for sporting business, we will take a look at the various and fascinating evolution of the modern Olympics in the last 120 years. With David Goldblatt, author of A Global History of the Games. Francis